Amen.
Yehesh Merach Le'olam Lamei Amayaha.
Ishme Rabba Mavarach Le'olam Emayaha. Yivarach Yishtabach Yivar V'Ramim Nasei V'Tadar V'Dlev L'Al Shmek V'Shat V'Riachu Ve'ela Min Kol V'Chatav V'Shurata Tushbechat Av Nechmata Diram B'Yoma V'Imru Amen.
Marty will begin the Amidah on 3b. We'll join for the Kedusha on page 4.
Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Elohei Avotenu Elohei Avraham Elohei Yitzchak Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah Elohei Rivka Elohei Rachel Elohei Leah El Hagadol Hayur V'Nora El Elyon Gomel Chasadim Tovim V'Konei HaKol Zocher Chasdei Avot Mevi Goel V'nei V'neihem V'man Shemo V'Yavaha Mel Hoseh Ufakeru Mashem Again Baruch Atah Adonai Magen Avraham Ufokei Tzaraham Ata Gibor Lomanai, Michayim Etim Tavrav Loshia, Michal Chaim Bechesed, Michayim Etim Brachmim Rabim, so Mech no flame Brofech Olim Matir Sarihim, Michayim and Shnei Afahar, Michamo Chabal Grot, Midam Elach, Melch Memit Michayek, Mismith Yeshua, Neman Talachayot Meitim, Baruch Atanai, Michayim.
Amen.
Nikadeshin Shahabi, Olam Kishem, Shemak Kishim, Otobis Marohom, Kakatubayad, Biacha, Karazel, Elzevia Mahar.
Kadosh, 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 Kadosh,
Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh, and Nightvot, Malaparas Kodaho, Yotam Baruch Yomeru.
Baruch Adonai Mikomo.
Baruch Adonai Mikomo, Drekus Kakatule Mohor.
Yimloch Hanelam Hayatzion L'Dor Hallelujah.
Yimloch Hanelam Hayatzion L'Dor Hallelujah. L'Dor Nagigod Lecha, Unetzim Netzachim Tishata Nekish. Yirchalahin, we pino, you usually love it. Yamel Kadosh Kadosh Ata Baruch Atanai.
Amen. The Ami doesn't say it privately, pages 3 to page 9.
Shalom b'mroma, Uya'asa shalom aleinu, V'al kol Yisrael, V'al kol yoshvei tevel, V'imru, Amen.
Continue on page 10.
G'day Merhaba. Behold, ma divrach yotim lich machutei b'chaychon mechon b'chayed b'chol Yisrael v'ozman kariv imru amen.
Amen. Yeheshua Rabach Elam Lomeh Maya.
Yesh me Rabban v'varach le'olam Yiparach v'yishtabach v'yipa'ar v'yitramam v'yinaseh v'tadar v'talev v'talal shemit v'sha v'rechu v'ele mikol v'chatav v'sharata tushbechata v'nechamata d'ram v'yomah v'imru amen. Tikabel tzolaham v'chol Yisrael kadam v'on shemaya v'imru amen. Yehesh lam Rabban min shemaya v'chayim v'chol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom v'imrumav hu yaseh shalom. Aleinu v'kol Yisrael v'imru amen.
Amen.
Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol l'teit b'dua l'yotzeh b'reishit shelo asanachei haratzot v'lo hosamanu k'mishkot hadama shelo sam chalkeinu kahem v'gohor aleinu k'chol hamonam v'anachnu kore'im u'mishtachavim u'modim lifnei melech malchei hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu Shemot Hashemayim v'yosod haaretz. Katuv v'torah tachananayim lo v'olam va'ed v'nemar v'haya Adonai v'melech al kol haaretz v'yom hahu yeh Adonai echad u'shemo echad.
Mourners Kaddish, page 12. You may unmute. Yitgadal.
Yikadal, Yikadash,
Yikadash,
Shemirabash, Yoma, Dibra, Matei, V'Yamlik, V'Chayim, V'Yachon, V'Yachon, V'Chayed, V'Lav, Zman, Karev, V'Amein, Dora, Hagol, V'Chol, Maya, Dibra, V'Yachon, V'Yachon, V'Yasei, V'Dar, V'Talev, V'Tolal, Hela mikol b'chata v'shmata av nefata v'nevan yoma yesh lama rabba mishmaya v'chayim aleinu v'yakol Yisrael v'imruamein oseh shalom b'rama yaseh shalom aleinu v'yakol Yisrael v'imru amen.
May all be seated. Eshukach Chazak Baruch to Marty Werber for leading us again tonight. Again, as he completes the yard site for his mother, Mildred. May her memory be for a blessing. We are coming to the nightfall, the beginning of Shavuot. In just a moment, Chazan Shamash will teach a little bit, and then we will say the Mari proper. The reason why is because the rabbi says, ideally possible, we shouldn't cheat out of the 49 days. Sheva Shabbatot Mimot. We should count 7 complete weeks. And so while it's often possible to start a holiday, especially Shabbat, a little bit on the early side, they want us to wait until the evening time to really bring in the festival of Shavuot. The reason so that we can really prepare ourselves completely through the full 49 days of preparing. Shavuot is also one of the Shalosh Regalim, one of the 3 pilgrimage festivals, and a time of the Samachta B'Chagecha, which actually Chazan is going to be talking about, and Mo'adim L'Simcha. However, as we said in our email earlier today, and anyone watching the news, it's not the most simcha time in the land of Israel. But yet, we continue to rejoice as much as we possibly can. As the rabbis say, we put aside any worries and anxieties as much as we possibly can. Yes, the IDF is going to be working on Shavuot, and we are very thankful for them to do that. But we are not on the IDF. And so we can rejoice and celebrate in Torah and find the joy that we need to perpetuate and to really make sure that Israel remains a strong country. And so with that, let's take some of our anxieties and transform it into joy. And I think Chazan is going to tell us a way to do that. So, Chazan Shamash, please.
Chag Sameach. And for people that are just entering, there are 2 resource sheets that are on the central podium there. So as people come in, if anyone would like to be an usher, maybe we could put them in the back. That would be great. So I'll be sharing and teaching and singing a little bit for the next 20 minutes or so, leading into Mariv. And there's a general meditation that we look at, and we can really apply this to every moment in our life. We'll say it together and sing it together several times. And then as I'm teaching about this question of whether we should approach life as a philosopher, as a thinker, or as a religious theologian, as a religious person that's connected to Torah and Talmud and learning, we'll use this melody as a way to weave our meditations and to get from one thought to another. ושמחת בחגיך והיית אך שמח ושמחת בחגיך והיית אך שמח ושמחת בחגיך והיית אך שמח ושמחת בחגיך והיית אך שמח. You shall rejoice on your festival, and you shall experience pure joy. So interesting. Oftentimes these festivals come up, we're not quite ready. We might be busy with certain things that we're dealing with in our homes and with our families or with our accounts. And we might say, I don't have room for this, or I might be so laden with certain thoughts and troubles. And what we learn from Deuteronomy 16, verses 14 and 15, these beginning words and ending words, that we need to actually step out of ourselves, to take that willingness to start to dance, to start to sing, to feel joyful, even if we're not quite joyful yet. That will bring us into a joyful state of being and will make us even more happy. ושמחת בחגיך והיית אך שמח לה 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 La 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 la. I began my studies a year ago for the first time jumping into the world of Jewish philosophy. And when I started, I could not believe what I was hearing. It sounded so beautiful and so mystical and so interesting. And the words of my professor, Rabbi Dr. Leonard Levin, just filled me with a sense of awe. It was like music, but it was really like music that I could not understand at all. For the first several hours of listening to the lectures, it didn't really enter my mind. But then after some time, I started to understand what a philosopher is. A philosopher, in my simple terms, is someone who thinks about thinking. And on conventional terms, you can also think of philosophy in the world of science, approaching, let's say, the celestial beings, the sun and the stars, and looking at mathematical arrangements with a sense of awe and God in the universe. And I've been steeped in the world of religious practice and ritual and have had ecstatic, joyful moments and deep, connected moments as a prayerful chazan and as a teacher and learner of Torah. So I had a certain attachment to that religious side. So I want to ask you today, are you somebody that can develop a sense of awe in God, develop a greater sense of faith through the apparent reality, the pure science that could be in front of you that is awesomely occurring and working out in a certain order? Or is it the richness of our tradition, the study and interaction, and the multi-leveled beauty of Torah learning that can bring you to a state of higher connectivity, a state of transcendence with our Holy One? So you'll see on your source sheet, I know our friends at home don't have it, there's a picture of Rambam. And look at Rambam there. He looks different. He doesn't look like the normal Jewish characters we're used to. You'll notice that there's actually a missing side lock. We learn in our tradition that we grow our side locks, and today you see people with beautiful payas. And so I'm going to share with you and read to you a little bit about my experience with analyzing where Rambam, one of our greatest thinkers, one of our greatest philosophers of the Jewish people, could be categorized as a philosopher, or perhaps you could even put him in the category of a mystic. So looking at these artistic portraits, you'll notice that his left sideburn, the side lock, the space between where any customary beard would grow, is bare. At first glance, this seems to be sort of a hairstyle, but the choice by Rambam to not have a complete beard, or by the artist to leave out the sideburn or side lock, perhaps has deeper implications. Furthermore, Rambam's face is turned so that the right sideburn, side lock, is not an apparent view. In Sha'ar HaGilgulim, the Ari holds Rambam in high regard. Conversely, he shares a fascinating comparison between Rambam and Ramban that provides another reference to the left sideburn, hinting at a mystical explanation behind the portrayal. He says, the Rambam is from the left sideburn. Therefore, he did not merit to know the wisdom of the Zohar, but the Ramban, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, is from the right sideburn, and therefore he merited to know the wisdom of the Zohar. So it's really a question I want you to ask yourself going forward today. If you had the opportunity to be deeply steeped in the mystical teachings, would you take that opportunity as somebody that's searching for a deeper connection with God, or would you perhaps try to take a deep dive into the Guide to the Perplexed and try to understand a philosophical connection to our holy teaching? I'll go forward quite a bit. From my studies, I was really deeply humbled by the challenge of understanding philosophy. Learning philosophy felt like a strange foreign language, and I still feel that I'm missing pieces of the message of the dialogue when I hear a great scholar teaching philosophy or even read a philosophical work. And to help myself and all of you here, I have created a metaphor of the start of a structure involving two planks of wood and a hammer and a nail. So here, what I want to try to do is put these two separate units of wood together. And to use these tools effectively, of course, one must hit the nail properly at a 90-degree angle. Otherwise, if you don't, the nail will bend, and it will become necessary to remove the nail and to start again. The nail is potentially damaged and cannot be used again to create the proper penetration for it to serve its purpose. Here, I'm looking to apply this experience of building with wood as an informative analogy To the process, I'm attempting to assembling philosophy and theology. So again, philosophy could be considered thinking about thinking or a scientific approach, and theology, including the rabbinical teachings and Jewish spirituality. And I'd like to see the potential for humanity, for all of us, and individuals to benefit greatly from the output of this enterprise. So here's the question. What if the nail doesn't hit correctly? It doesn't work. And what does the nail represent? And I learned from my teacher, there's a point where trust and hope come together, and a certain amount of each is necessary. I'm going to read that again. There's a point where trust and hope come together, and a certain amount of each, trust and hope, are necessary to be able to achieve an understanding of either discipline, either philosophical understanding or religious understanding. And in this analogy I'm creating, the nail in itself is the trust. And engaging in the motion that will hopefully be at 90 degrees is the faith that is necessary to even try to wield the hammer. Because if you don't hit it right, it's not going to work. And that's where there are different types of faith or different systems of faith. You could minimize the need for faith, in this case of trying to hit the nail properly, by using a nail gun machine, for example, which is engineered and aligned to penetrate at 90 degrees. And I'd like to suggest that masterfully shared philosophy or exquisite deep engagement in tefillah or Torah study is like the wonder of the nail gun, which can function at very high success rate. And there's an opportunity for individuals to learn the practice of effectively using a hammer. I remember some months ago, I was with my family for so many months, as all of us were, and trying to think of activities to do with my son Ethan. And I realized, okay, maybe I can teach him how to hit a hammer in a nail. And it was very adorable to see him trying to do it. And that's where I came up with this this understanding of the struggle, but then the simplicity of someone who has practice is able to do this with no problem at all. So the two boards that I'd like us to link together, and in future study sessions perhaps, because I won't get to much of the guide for the perplexed, or even Yehuda Halevi, a great philosopher, or to get to some of the great Kabbalistic concepts that I've been trying to learn over recent months. I'd like us to build this skid system of belief where theology and philosophy can be connected. There has to be a certain absorption of philosophical concepts or a live teacher of philosophy available, along with a significant measure and investment of trust in the spiritual system. And this engagement can provide fruit and uplift and hope through sufficient practice in engaging in the relationship with the holiness of God that can be found. For example, in the constant creative forces that surround us and in the constant revelation that unfolds, both from scientific discovery and through personal striving towards soulful improvement. We can find that sometimes a bent nail can be straightened to be used again, and sometimes the effort to straighten it can result in breaking the nail. So emunah, trust, can be nourished with constant practice. Assuming that each of us is in a different place along the emunah, trust spectrum, one might be practiced enough to handle certain difficult challenges and disappointments, but not other challenges and disappointments. When one is disappointed or traumatized by a negative occurrence in their lives, the severity of the negative outcome or emotional pain can weaken trust in Hashem. And practice of emunah is necessary until the person becomes spiritually stronger and is able to handle that loss or pain without losing their connection to God. Let's again reflect on the nail not straightened as a metaphor for one having trust in a philosophical system. And there are many different philosophers with many different compelling, yet even opposite philosophical teachings. But to benefit from this system, one must be willing to try to straighten the nail. In other words, to establish or to compose or to subscribe to a master who has learned and applied a system of philosophy and theology, and whose teachings can be integrated with religious practice and observance. And I would add mystical teachings that are awe-inspiring and sound. One should not necessarily throw out the bent nail. However, looking at this verse from Kohelet, it seems that crooked things cannot be returned to their original state. You'll find on your resource sheet, Muvat lo yuchal litkon, v'chesron lo yuchal himanot. So we learn from Kohelet, and of course we need to read this in context, but it also is very clear here, that which is crooked cannot be made straight, and that which is missing cannot be numbered. Further meditating on this verse, I think and lament about the human tendency to be judgmental of a particular religious leader, a theologian or philosopher, who may have missed the mark on a teaching or theory. And in my opinion, most incorrectly projected truths from the past can be straightened, just as many a bent nail can be straightened and reused. So through my study, I encourage all of us to challenge the words of Kohelet above and to see that there are moments and understanding and teachings that can be straightened. And there may be many omissions by a philosopher or a rabbi that can be filled in, or there could be a missing element that may be actually counted and understood by future generations. So through this study, this Leil Shavuot, and this opportunity to engage in a deep study in philosophy and theological teachings, the endeavor of trying to interpret a no longer living philosopher through their writings and teachings is admirable, but it can also lead to confusion and potential misinterpretation. And I pray that we have another Rambam to teach us today, to inform us with medical ingenuity, with spiritual uplift, that we all can experience a tikkun where we can combine our individual fragility with a strength and a hope and a striving towards engaging in our religious practice, engaging in loving the Torah. ושמחת בחגיך והיית אך שמח ושמחת בחגיך והיית אך שמח la 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 la. May we rejoice on this festival of Shavuot, and we all can experience pure joy. And let us say, Amen.
Shekach Hazaka Baruch to Chazan
Thank you.
Shamash for really beautiful teaching. My Thursday class has dabbled a little bit in some of those things, and we can certainly do more. And I really want to invite you to study with us, to teach us, and to combine really that the mystical tradition and the rational tradition. What do they have in common? Is first of all, they know they have their limitations. Even Rambam recognized that the true rational, the ideal philosopher king was Moshe and really was God. And so how can we as humans get to know that? And obviously in the mystical tradition, there's the Ein Sof, and we only know God through the Sfirot And as we'll read tomorrow's Haftarah, they're meditating on God's chariot. Yet, what do they have all in common? The Torah. For all of them, the Sefer Torah was I don't want to say cheat sheet. It was really God's gift to the world and to the Jewish people so that they could have some answers to these unknowable questions. And so, really, it's beautiful to study and think about these things, even if they hurt our head a little bit on Shavuot night. And so, with that, we are going to turn you from a teacher to a chazan, which is really both in the same, but we're going to hear your voice and be inspired by your voice, chazan, as we rise on page 28 for the Baruch Hu for the first night of Shavuot.
Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach.
Baruch le'olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Mevorach le'olam va'ed.
You may be seated.
Umavir yom, umevir laila, umavdir ben yom uven laila, Adonai tzvaot shemo. Echai v'kayam, tamid yimloch aleinu le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai, Ha'ma'ariv aravi.
Amen.
Ahavat olam mitzvah.
The Torah is our life, the length of our days. We'll meditate them on day and night.
כי הם חיינו ואורך ימינו ובהם נגע יומם ולילה כי הם חיינו ואורך ימינו ובהם נגע יומם ולילה כי הם חיינו ואורך ימינו ובהם נגע יומם ולילה כי הם חיינו ואורך ימינו בהם נגע יומם ולילה. ואהבתך תשים ממנו לעולמים, ברוך אתה אדוני, אוהב עמו ישראל.
Amen.
שמע ישראל, אדוני אלוהינו, אדוני אחד. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך, ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך, ובלכתך בדרך, ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך. אדוני אלוהיכם אמת.
Page 32. Heavenly Father,
ומלכותו ברצון קיבלו עליהם משה ומרים ובני ישראל, לכנו שירה בשמחה רבה, ואמרו כולם, מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נדע בקודש, נורא תהילות אוסף אל. מלכותך רבנך בוקע היום לפני משה, זה אלי אנו ואמרו, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. ונאמר כי פדה אדוני את יעקב, וגלו מיד חזק ממנו. ברוך אתה אדוני גאל ישראל.
God spread over the shelter of peace over us, over all God's people, Israel, over the entire world, and over Jerusalem.
ושמור צאתנו ובואנו לחיים ולשלום מעתה ועד עולם. ופרוס עלינו סוכת שלומך, ברוך אתה אדוני הפורס סוכת שלום עלינו ועל כל עמו ישראל ועל ירושלים.
Amen. Please rise. We recite the second paragraph on page 34. וידבר משה את מועד אדוני על בני ישראל.
וידבר משה את מועדי אדוני אל בני ישראל, יתקדש ויתקדש שמי רבה, בעלמא יברח חירותי וימליך מלכותי. בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי כל בית ישראל, בגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך לעולם ולעלמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי קודש הבריחו ואלה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה תמירן בעלמה ואמרו amen.
The Amidah for Shavuot Eve is recited privately 41 to 44, adding the pieces for Zman Matan Toratenu.
Shalom Rav Yisrael Amecha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amecha Tasim Leolam. Ki atavu melech adon lechol hashalom. Ki atahu melech adon lechol hashalom. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amecha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amecha Tasim Leolam. וטוב בעיניך לברך את עמך ישראל בכל עת ובכל שעה בשלומך. שלום רב ישראל עמך תשים לעולם. שלום רב ישראל עמך תשים לעולם. תשים לעולם. תשים לעולם.
Page 48, Kadush Shalem.
יתקרב יתקרא שמי רבה, ועלמא דברה חירותי ומפחותי בחייכון ובמכון, ובחיי תוכו בית ישראל, בגלה בזמן קריב, ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך, ועלמא עלמי עלמיה. יתברך וישתבח, ויתפאר, ויתרום ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתעלה, שמי קודשה ברכו לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תשבחתה ונחמתה תמירן בעלמא, ואמרו אמן. תתקבץ צלות רבתון דרכו ישראל, קודם עוון ושמיא, ואמרו אמן. יש לרב מן שמיא וחיים על נבקו ישראל, ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, ויעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ועל כל יושבי תבל, ואמרו amen.
On page 50, the Chazan is going to fill a kosh shel bracha, a cup of blessing. Those at home, I encourage you to fill one yourself. And the Chazan will lead us in Kiddush and then the Shechianu. And when we get to the Shechianu, I encourage all of us to find and think about those Shechianu moments that have taken us from Passover to now, and really from last year to now, and to find and cherish the blessings that are in our life.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol העם, ורוממנו מכל לשון, וקידשנו במצוותיו. ותיתן לנו אדוני אלוהינו באהבה, מועדים לשמחה, חגים וזמנים לששון. את יום חג השבועות הזה זמן מתן תורתנו במקרא קודש, זכר ליציאת מצרים. הבנו ובחרת, ואותנו קידשת מכל העמים, ומועדי קודשך בשמחה ובששון הנחלתנו. ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש ישראל והזמנים. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, שהחיינו וקיימנו והגיענו לזמן הזה.
Amen. L'chaim. We continue with Aleinu, page 51.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, אתן כלולה יוצא בראשית, שלא עשנו כאויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם. אנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא. ככתוב בתורתך, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, ונאמר, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד, ושמו אחד. לה 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 La 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 la.
Mourners Kaddish, page 52. You may unmute. Yitzkadal,
Yidal,
Yitzkadal,
Yitzkadal,
Shmei Rabba,
Ba'adi
B'yamad,
Ba'ad,
Yirak, Yitzkadal, Bizman, Kari, Bimru, Amen.
Yehi Shmei Rabba Mevarach Yiparach
Shemay Kushim, Yesh Rabba Min Shemay, Israel, Huya Shalom, Yaakov Israel, Amen.
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 To Chazan Shamash for teaching us, for leading us in a beautiful Mariv. After we conclude the service, I'll stay on. You're welcome to keep joining. I'm going to teach for just 20, 25 minutes. There's plenty more on the RA website, actually on YouTube or on Zoom, so you can stay up all night for all those things. Join us tomorrow morning at 9:30 here in the sanctuary and on Zoom. And there's also a tent service at 10 o'clock. And I believe Mincha Mariv tomorrow night is at 8:05. So now I have a question for our philosopher and mystic Chazan. Are you going to choose the hymn Yigdal based on Maimonides' 13 attributes, which is probably more mystical than we think? Or are you going to choose the Adon Olam, which I don't even know if it's rational or mystical, probably a little bit of both. So you get to choose.
That is a great question. Now, I was definitely thinking towards Yigdal, which would be more towards the eternity of our souls, which I would like to debate about in the future, and to discuss that is just a powerful notion I found that can help us practically, that we want to try to improve ourselves as much as we can in this life, in this day, so that we can arrive in better situations in the future. Not so. I'd like us to pray that as we do very traditionally.
Beautiful. Kavanah for Yigdal, page 53.
יגדל אלוהים חי וישתבח, נמצא ונט מציאותו, אחד בן יחיד כייחודו, נעלם וגם אין סוף לאחדותו, אין לו דמות הגוף ואינו גוף, לא נערוך אליו קדושתו, קדמון לכל דבר אשר נברא, ראשון וראשית לראשיתו, הינו אדון עולם וכל נוצר, יורה גדולתו ומלכותו, שנבואתו ניתנו, אל אנשי סגולתו ותפארתו, לא קם בישראל כמו שעוד, נביא ומביט את אמונתו, תורת אמת נתן לעמו, היה נביאו נאמן ביתו, לא יכל יפאר ולא ימיר דתו, לעולמים לזולתו, צופה ויודע סתרנו, מביט לסוף דבר בקדמתו, אומר איש חסד כמפעלו, נותן רשע רע כרשעתו, ישלח לגט ימין משיחנו, לפתות מחקקת ישועתו, מתים יחיה ברוב חסדו, ברוך הדעת שם תהילתו, מתים יחיה ברוב חסדו, ברוך הדעת שם תהילתו.
Chag Sameach, just to throw everybody off, I'm going to go teach from the middle. For the few people here, I can be a little bit closer to them.
Baruch, yeah.
It's so interesting that this different year has really thrown us. Obviously, all of the service used to be up from there, and in the last few years, they've been from here. And so I want to try to get us back into, if we're going to be tipping our toe into, I'm going to call it new normal, or sort of just moving forward. If we're going to move forward, then we should move forward from this bima as opposed to that bima. So with that, Jamie has been great, our Zoom wizard, to share a link to the sheet that I have in here. It's longer than we're going to do, okay? I'm giving you homework if you'd like for the rest of the holiday. So I really promise, okay? And my watch says, I think it's a little bit on the slower side. My watch says it's almost 9 o'clock. I think it's probably closer to 5 of 9. By 9:25, we're going to be out of here, okay? I don't want to take her long. But I wanted to just expand upon, if you were on earlier with Rabbi Stecker and Dubs Weinblatt and Tani, I apologize, I forget her last name. What? Perel. Okay, there was just a beautiful conversation. It was recorded. We are going to post a link about it. And really, we have to check with them. Okay, I apologize for stepping forward. I had the privilege of listening to them. And really what they are asking us to do, if we're going to say we all stood at Sinai, then we need to really recognize and see all Jews for who they are and meet them where they are. And for different reasons, we don't do that properly for people of color, and we don't do that properly for people that are non-gender binary. And we need to do a better job about that. And I think just the idea of what does it mean to have a Jewry, a Jewish nation that looks different around the world, wherever you are. And then there's that ultimate question is, what does it mean to be part of the Jewish nation or Judaism? Is it someone that they can just sort of feel in their heart, do some real introspection, join a community, and that makes them Jewish? Or do they need to go through some formal process? And that's not an easy question, because if there are people for whom they came at this with really genuineness and even have a genuine belief that there's nothing for them, there's no transformation that they need to go through. It's just they're naturally Jewish. Even if they can acknowledge a previous sort of practice in their own life, once they find Judaism, they say, I'm here. Why don't you see me for who I am? Why must I go through a process? Now, yes, it's easy to, not easy, it's possible to say, and many have, and I'll get to the conservative movement in a second, to say something that I've actually learned from Reform colleagues, the metaphor of the glasses, of you may see yourself as Jewish, okay? But right now you don't have glasses on, or the people around you don't have glasses, and so the world is kind of blurry. By going through a formal process, then you put on your glasses and everything is in focus, and there's no more question that you were a Jew. And even by saying no more question, that's where the offense potentially can come from. What do you mean? I wasn't a Jew before that? And even if we can get them to the mikveh, we just have to find a way to meet them, to hear them, hear where people are coming from. I think that is the best lesson, perhaps, as we're standing at Mount Sinai. What do we hear? And we need to hear each other. So I'm going to take us through just a brief journey. There's actually videos and stuff that you can watch after the holiday about two communities in Africa. One on east side in Uganda, and one on the west side in Ghana, which is just amazing, their stories, and one that I can be proud of as a conservative rabbi, that the conservative movement has really taken leadership in making them part of the global Jewish community. So where did that sort of come from? You're going to see the story of the Ghana Jews, who, if you can say that they trace their ancestry either to the lost 10 tribes I'll get to in a second, or from Portuguese Jews that fled down, first perhaps into Morocco, and then down south through the Sahara to Ghana. By the way, Ghana, if you want to look at a map, is on what's called the Gold Coast, sort of on the top. I think it's the Horn, I think, is the top little piece that juts out. So it's right in the bottom there. And so it's sub-Saharan, but not that much sub-Saharan. And Uganda is on the other side towards the mouth of the Nile River. So that's getting your sort of a little bit of geography. So the Ghana Jews say, we either came, from Israel as part of the 10 tribes flooding through Egypt and down to Morocco and down, or they're Portuguese Jews that got on boats and came across that way, and that their tradition was lost. So I'll get to them in a second. But just that story made me think about we're wandering Jews. And that's what Shavuot in many ways is. If you see that we call Shavuot Yom HaBikurim, the festival of the first fruits. And what happened? We would bring the basket of our first fruits and we'd say, Aromi Oved Ovi. Now we recognize this as our Passover Haggadah, but this in the temple was recited on Shavuot day. There was literally sort of, again, the Talmud sort of discusses what would happen. And just like on Passover, there's everyone slaughtering their lambs for Passover. Here, everyone's got the little baskets, and you got the Kohanim sort of saying, say after me, I mean, they probably got sick of saying that all the time. But the fact that it had to get repeated, just this is the first words we say. And yes, I know there's what does it mean? Was it a Aramean sought to destroy my father? which is the traditional midrash, but the real translation is my father was a wandering Aramean. Jacob was a wanderer, and he went down to Egypt, and by a Gorsham, he sojourned there, and he was really a stranger there. That's what a ger is, a stranger. And so our own tradition begins, if we're going to say that obviously Jacob's not the first, you have Jacob, Isaac, and Abraham, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, but part of our tradition, our forefathers, our ancestors, involved wandering. And same thing with Abraham, by the way, Lech Lecha. So we can begin there. Everything started with wandering, moving around. So is it really hard to think that Jews are found around far-fetched places of the earth? By the way, why are they far-fetched? Why do we need to have that Western sort of view? Africa is a beautiful place. It could be the center of the world for them. So it's just sort of our Western-centric view, which will come up, by the way. The colonialism will come up. So I'm going to skip a little bit some of the sources here about the 10 tribes and Ezekiel's vision of the bringing of the tribes together, but it just sort of should stick in our head as we think about it. And then obviously we think about Ruth. And there's the famous line where Ruth says to Naomi, "Don't urge me to leave you. Turn back to not follow you. For wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. For your people shall be my people, and your God, my God." And this is seen as the first convert. She didn't go to a mikveh. She didn't come before a Beit Din, and yet she merits to be the great-grandmother of King David. And by the way, she's a Moabite, and Deuteronomy says the Moabites can't come into the nation. So there's a lot to be made of that, to unpack in that, and say there's many exceptions, maybe not even. If someone clings to the Jewish people and clings to Torah, then can we accept them? Perhaps should we accept them because they are clinging to Torah just like we are supposed to do. And then I brought the Yavamot tractate, or Braita really, which talks about the formal conversion. And I actually did one with Rabbi Secker earlier today. And we literally follow this. We say, don't you know the Jewish people are oppressed? There's a war in Israel, for God's sakes. Why do you want to be a Jew? And this individual really had a beautiful answer. And it says we go up and we convert him. And we did a Hatzafatim Brit after that. So we did this formal process, and that's part of Jewish tradition, part of Talmudic tradition. So we just need to know that that exists. And then I'm on page 7 of the thing. For those in person, you're obviously going to see these little play things. I actually embedded the YouTube. So first, well, I'll get to the Abu Daya Jews in Uganda, and then to the Beit Israel Jews in Ghana. And so Abu Daya is about a 14-minute, not really documentary, but you'll see, by the way, there's Sim Shalom prayer books there. And when you look at the Ghana one, which is on Amazon Prime, you also will see Hertz Chumashim and Sim Shalom Sidurim there. So it's just sort of beautiful. So again, I don't want to take too long. I gave you this sort of a little bit of the links of who they are. The Abu Yadaya, I apologize for people of Judah, they really are a product of colonialism. And I'm going to name that, okay? Colonialism affected the world, and certainly Africa and certainly the Americas. And the rash around of conversion and wars and, in God's name, as we say, from or not in God's name, the late Jonathan Sachs. Unfortunately, many wars were fought in God's name, where the conversion to Islam, to Christianity, the fights between them really led to a lot of strife, because also they were literally undoing and uprooting thousands of years of traditional culture in Africa and in the Americas, wherever they went. And we just can't replace it. But we just have to sort of know with mourning how many languages, how many cultures were just uprooted, and also acknowledge, by the way, how, as those people converted, they actually kept many of their folk traditions. And so that's something to just acknowledge, the power of the folk, even after a colonial person comes and converts them. And you always wonder if the conversion is for power reasons or for real belief. And so we literally see that in the history of that. The first person who declared himself Jews, Kakungulu, converted to Christianity in 1880. And he thought the British were going to give him territory. And guess what? They didn't give it to him. And so he's now frustrated. And then he joined some other group of Christians. And after a while, he's reading this Testament, this Bible that he has, and looking at the Old Testament and saying, what are these words? What's going on here? And of course, Christians have a way of interpreting it. And he's like, but I want to do this stuff. This speaks to me. Circumcision, kashrut, the seventh day speaks to me. And what's beautiful, at least is sort of as told, a Christian says, if you're going to do these things, then you're a Jew. And he says, okay, I'm Jewish. So that's his declaration. And he literally takes this seriously. And there always were Jews wandering around, perhaps with the colonialists. There were merchants. They were slave traders. I mean, the slave trade is not really going on in the 1920s, but we have to do acknowledge that too, by the way, that Jews were part of the slave trade. And so this guy Yosef, presumably of Ashkenazi background, teaches his Kakungulu about the Jewish traditions, and he starts to teach them to others, and he even forms a yeshiva. And so you have a small fledgling Jewish community that's not exactly like we have. You could think about sort of the game of tradition. If a non-versed rabbi comes and teaches you a little bit about Judaism, and then you start a community about that, eventually it's not going to look exactly like the Judaism of other places. Because even though they're not fledgling in parts of the world, they are disconnected. I don't want to say even remote. They are disconnected from, or have been disconnected from, the other Jewish communities. And so then they get discovered, and there's a small group. And so the Abu Yadaya, I don't know the exact circumstances that the conservative movement got in touch with the Abu Yadaya community. One is, first of all, that one of their people, who's Nahum, and I'm not going to Gershom Suzumu, went to to Ziegler School in California, and so he was trained by them. And so by that, we definitely now have a connection that there is a conservative rabbi in Uganda. And so he took all of his knowledge that he had, and yes, some of the donations that he was able to get here in America, to build a real yeshiva and a real school and a day school for all the people in the area, because they're about teaching. So yes, there are non-Jews in their school, and they have computers, and there's a way for them to be connected. And they went on a birthright trip to Israel, and this is where the controversy is going to come. Are they Jewish? And that's where we got issues. And so the conservative movement did, as it says here, went in February 2002, 5 rabbis came and gave them all a formal conversion. Again, for the glasses pieces. But they weren't so sure why they needed to do that. Now, let's switch to the next page. And I apologize. Oh, there's there's no break. I didn't put it. I put a break. Actually, the link is okay. The Times of Israel article is the break to Ghana's deep spirituality points some joyfully back to Judaism. So the Ghana history, really quickly, is not one person in the colonial age sort of discovering his Jewish soul. I don't even say it's Jewish roots. In Ghana, what you have is people that part of their folk practice was that menstrual women stayed away for 7 days, bathed in the river, and then were able to return to their partners. People, I don't know how their kashrut was thing, but they only ate animals that we would consider kosher. And the 7th day of the week was a day of rest for them. And this was just ingrained, and it wasn't called Judaism because they had to hide it. Similar to, we know what happened with the conversos, the Moranos, in places like Mexico and what became Arizona and New Mexico. Similar circumstances. And so eventually they sort of rediscover what they're doing. There was actually, they talk about this preacher who, again, against the colonials, forcing Christianity down their throat, saying, let's preach this Judaism. And people reawoken, this was in the 70s, reawoke to their folk customs and built a Jewish community. And they again reached out and are now teaching their Judaism to people. And the conservative movement is helping them. And you can sort of see here already, we want to just be part of it. Why do you have to make us convert? So I'm on page 12. Ansa, one of their leaders, added the community wasn't really sure what a conversion ceremony entailed, though it hopes to find a rabbi somewhere in the world that can act as a spiritual advisor and help provide guidance. But they're not sure why they need to even be converted. They feel Jewish inside of them. And so again, we go to the question piece. Are they part of the Jewish community? Do we have to welcome them? Or can we have the glasses enough to say that Jews come in all colors and all identities? And if they are drawn to Torah, then we have to join along with them to Torah. And on this I'll end. As a rabbi, someone clearly drawn to teaching and wanting to help people connect to this tradition, both documentaries bring up these people who they want to just be rabbis. They literally want to connect to this tradition and help open others to this tradition. And who am I, even as a rabbi, to say to them, you're not Jewish enough. You can't come to Israel. You can't belong to us just because, and yes, there is, I don't know if I would use the word systemic racism here, but there is a hesitancy. Who are these people in places that did not traditionally have Jewish communities to join us? But we could say the same thing about Yemenite Jews. We could say the same thing about Jews from Bukhara, from the Far East. Why are they Jews? We somehow are able to see that they are Jewish. Then we can do the same thing with Jews from Africa. And so I'll leave the debate for another time whether we should have them go through a formal conversion or not. But we definitely should support them and find a way for them to be part of our community. And actually, Gershom, the Abu Daya Jew, if you look online, actually, his granddaughter got married in February, towards the end of the, sort of in the middle of the pandemic. And there's actually a picture on his Facebook of his granddaughter's ketubah. And it looks like a ketubah that we would have. And so it's just a beautiful sort of thing to know that they are not remote, they're not disconnected anymore, especially with Facebook and other things, with all the problems that I know that come with social media. You can befriend some of these Abu Daya Jews and these Ghana Jews and really connect and see what they're doing, and they can see what we are doing. And so my dream on this Yom of Bikurim, to remember that we all were wanderers. We all are wanderers. We're looking through the globe. We're looking through our hearts and our minds for the answers that the philosophers and the mystics wanted. And if we join together and study Torah, then maybe we can find some of the answers. Chag Sameach.